All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Yen. I am a 2015 grad and currently serving on the UNH Alumni Association Board of Directors. The UNH Alumni Association serves as the bedrock of our alumni community, working to connect alumni to each other and to UNH. Thank you for supporting UNH with your time tonight. We encourage you to take advantage of your Wildcat benefits by visiting the UNH Alumni Relations website at unh.edu/alumni. Tonight's webinar, In Depth on Inclusion, NH Black History, is another episode in the webinar series presented by Alumni Relations. Our moderator is Selina Choate. Selina earned her BA in psychology and later went on to obtain a master's degree in public administration from UNH. She has worked for the university's Office of First-Year Programs for 6 consecutive years and served as the Liberty Mutual Sponsored Diversity Network Program Coordinator for 5 years. Prior to working at UNH, she served as a staff assistant and outreach representative in Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter's Constituents Service Office. Selina brings a wealth of knowledge from the nonprofit industry. She served on 2 state boards and served as a treasurer for the Manchester NAACP and is currently a board of director for the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. She has received various awards, including the UNH Diversity Hall of Fame Award in 2019, and is also a 2-time recipient of the UNH Social Justice Award. The panelists will answer questions at the end of the webinar, so please note the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, where you can submit your questions throughout the program. And with that, I will turn it over to Selina.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome and thank you again for joining us this evening as together we uncover New Hampshire's deep-rooted history of slavery, segregation, neglect of African-American history. And this is this theme and this topic is especially important as the nation is grappling with what we teach in our educational schools and what we are able to discuss. And so we are going to continue to have a conversation about the rich history here in New Hampshire and what happens when we unveil and embrace our Black history and also confront the systems that work or function to erase it. And so at this moment, I would like to welcome our diverse and dynamic panelists. Each panelist, if you could take 1 minute to introduce yourself by stating your name, pronouns, occupation, and what are the work that you are doing in New Hampshire that kind of connects or relates to the theme or topic of this evening. So, JerriAnne.
Thank you, Selina, and thank you everyone for being here. My name is JerriAnne Boggis. My pronouns are she and hers. I am the executive director for the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, where we're working to raise awareness for New Hampshire's Black history, a history that extends beyond 400 years. And by telling these corrective narratives, including these stories in our history and our collective memory, we hope we create these more inclusive communities and create a more welcoming environment for all of us. And that's the work that we do in sharing this information.
Dariya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dariya Steele. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a senior here at UNH with a major in anthropology and a minor in women's and gender studies. I used to intern at the Seacoast African American Cultural Center under anthropology professor Casey Golomsky, but I'm currently an intern at the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, where I am just learning from some really amazing people and just learning about Black history and just New Hampshire, where I grew up.
And Senator Waters.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Waters. I'm the state senator for District 4, which is the Dover area, and I taught at the University of New Hampshire for 39 years. JerriAnne and I, through the Center for the Humanities, started the Black New England Conference, and also through the Center of the Humanities under Bert Feintuch's leadership, created the film Shadows Fall North, and I am a board member on the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire.
Thank you. And we will definitely hear more from our panelists in a few. But first, we are going to show you a 8-minute clip of the 2-hour documentary, Shadows Fall North. And during this time, I'm hoping that you can reflect on today's question and our topic and type your or prepare your questions for the Q&A portion of our time together later. And without further ado, we can start the video.
I was at my desk at the University of New Hampshire that Tuesday morning on October 7th, 2003, when I got the phone call saying, Valerie, they're digging up the street. You know what they found on Chestnut Street?
You know, these bones on the street are not animal bones. They're human. They tell a story. They have a life. They have a history. They have wishes, wants, desires, just like any human being had.
It's a case of seeing is believing, I suppose. This is why it's important to preserve historic sites. We do know that during the period of time that that burial place was active, the vast majority of the Black people in Portsmouth were actually enslaved.
These people came here on ships from the West Indies and Africa. And those ships stopped in Newport and New Bedford and Boston and Salem and Portsmouth and Portland. And people were sold from those ships.
We pride ourselves in New England with historic cemeteries, never saying that beneath the pavement we trod upon, there's a people buried in a ground just as sacred.
You know, if you go anywhere in New England and you're looking at any of the brochures that promote a town here, you know, it's picturesque, it's the rolling hills, it's the colonial homes, it's the Revolutionary War vets, it's the Civil War. But the minute we include a history of a Black person, a person of color, it asks us to look deeper at that history.
Harriet Wilson, we can call her essentially the mother of all female African-American writers. Our Nig was published in 1859. It was the first novel written by an African-American to be published on the North American continent. When she says Our Nig, or sketches of a life of a free Black in a 2-story white house north, showing as slavery's shadows fall even there by our Nig. Harriet was essentially bringing slavery home to folks who couldn't understand it being in their backyard.
One of the things that's important to think about is the isolation of enslaved New Englanders. And this is something that Harriet Wilson, who was in bondage, if not enslaved in New Hampshire, starting in the early 1830s, also experienced.
The history of African Americans in the North has only been recently discovered, so to speak.
You see references in newspapers and magazines still about how lily white New Hampshire is. New Hampshire has never been lily white, and it is not now.
It's only recently where people are understanding now that there was more to the story. It wasn't just the Pilgrims or the Puritans in Boston, Africans who were brought to New England. They have a story to tell.
In 1779, 20 slaves from Portsmouth petitioned the New Hampshire General Court. They too wanted to share in the freedom that the colonies were seeking. Their plea fell on deaf ears, and 14 of these men died as slaves. It is a particular privilege to be here to sign such an important law, even if it is a law that is centuries overdue.
We heard about the true honor of heritage and tradition. We heard about the true pain that many had felt, and we took the time to understand it. So tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we will see the Confederate flag come down.
We're more visual people than literary. They see that flag, they know exactly what they're looking at. Having other things to look at is paramount.
And this is why what I call sort of historical activists like JerriAnne Boggis, like Valerie Cunningham, who are creating ways of remembering that are inclusive, that are truthful, right?
So that people can see, people can understand and realize that, unlike the flag, it's not going away.
Symbolism is important, but it is my hope that we do not forget about the other men, the women, and the children who were enslaved in the state of New Hampshire at the time of this petition.
1857, slavery is abolished in New Hampshire. We're just a little bit slow.
American history has never all been kind to the Black story, the African story. It's been erased time and time and time again.
The last state to adopt the Martin Luther King holiday. Well, just a little bit slow, but we live free or die. The more we tell the stories and the more that we realize that this is not Black history, this is our story. This is the American story.
William and Mary, hey, some people have studied up.
Once you include a Black history, you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to the town? What does it mean to the individual person who cherishes a certain ideal of New England?
Black people have been invisible people in this country. It's convenient to not see what you don't want to see, I suppose.
Ooh, I mean, what a powerful 8 minutes. Just imagine watching that film in its entirety. There's just so much to unpack with just that short clip, but I want to give the panelists the opportunity to answer a few questions. But I just have to reflect on that for a minute, because it's just so rich. And to see that, to hear that, and I was present during the ceremony where they were burying the bodies, the bodies that were in the caskets in Portsmouth, and just the presence. And JerriAnne, in the documentary, when you were talking about honoring and recognizing the people who have lives, they had lives, they had wishes, they had desires, they had hopes, they had dreams, and to just really acknowledge that, and it makes, I hope it makes us want to continue to unveil the history and the stories of African people in this state, and also in this nation and in the country. So I guess I'll start with you, JerriAnne. How has this personal journey in history affected your life and the lives of those involved? And what inspired you to take up this mantle to unveil the history of Africans in the state of New Hampshire?
Okay, so thank you, Selina. And I have to point to one moment in that little clip that we looked at. If everybody remembers and saw this young woman at that the recreation of Civil War days, and there was that one young Black woman that's standing in the crowd, and the look on her face and the way she looked around at the people around her, trying to disappear, trying to erase herself from that space. That was the most powerful moment in the film, because it spoke to me of how I felt living here. If you don't have a sense of roots, if you don't have a story, if you don't see yourself reflected in the town, you don't feel like you belong. And so that was where I came from with this work in 2002, when there was an article in our local paper that said that Harriet Wilson was born and raised in Milford, New Hampshire. Now, I'd lived in Milford over 20 years, and that was that first acknowledgement in my town, in the whole state, that I knew that our history went back to the 1800s. And there was an article that followed that where a teacher said that Wilson's book was inappropriate for school children to study. And that's really the impetus that got me going and saying, we need to know this woman, we need to honor her, we need her book in schools, we need a statue, we need to make her existence permanent and present in a state that is often called, as Valerie mentioned, one of the whitest in the Union, because that changes your perception of the town, the state completely, to know that. And it not only changes the stereotypes of who we think Black people are. This woman wrote a book, in 1859, changing the whole trajectory of African-American literature. And any person other than a person of color who had done that would be honored in the town. There would be buildings named after her. There'd be streets named after her. Their house would be, we would recognize her. And so that's the work that I started doing, and really becoming, through Wilson's story, became invested in my town, wanting to be visible, wanting to work and know the people around me, wanting to know what the town stood for and how we work together to create that story. Because it's not just Black history story, it's American story. What Wilson did was an American story. Her life, what we did at the burying ground, is American story. We can no longer, when those sites of memory, those visible memorials are there, the African Burying Ground Memorial, we can't ignore that history. We have to deal with it. And that's what I'm excited about, making those stories visible, and bringing, really dispelling myths about who Black people are and how the roles they play in our communities. We have people that left Black men that were working to be citizens, leaving their leaving bequeath to the town library, leaving schools to the towns, writing the town's history, traveling, all these things that we would think that only white men of history did, but no, we were right there doing the same thing. And it changes your perception of the town.
Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to just follow up on what you were stating about, knowing your history, knowing that there's history here in the state of New Hampshire, there's a sense of belonging. And that's something that, that is so important. And I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, and, I've lived in New Hampshire for 20 years. And, we talk about how New Hampshire is very white, and what are you doing? What do Black people do in New Hampshire, and why are they in New Hampshire? But, it's important, and to what you're stating is that if we unveil the history, we tell these stories, if we, share these stories in the schools and in our public spaces and recognize them, then, people will feel a sense of belonging. We can, dispel the myth that that Black people or any people of color, BIPOC individuals cannot live in New Hampshire. So I think it's important. And can you just speak a little bit on the work that the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire is doing right now to help towards that, and how does it contribute to fight against what we're seeing in our school systems, where they're trying to erase the history and not tell the story of Black people?
Before I do that, I just want to add to one of the things you say, because what Valerie said in that film, that New Hampshire had never been lily white. The other day at one of our tea talks, we have these programs, community dialogues around main subjects. And we had a Native American that really sent it home when she said that Native Americans were on our soil right here in New Hampshire from the time of the woolly mammoth. And if you think about that, if you think of that long history, there's just no way you can see the state the way we want to portray it, as just, celebrating these 400th anniversary as just being 400-year-old. We have people that have histories, in the time of man, right? So that changes it. So that's what we are about doing at the Black Heritage Trail. Really raising awareness for these stories, telling the stories across the state, making the signs, making it visible through markers. We put markers in towns at visible sites of memory where Black history did occur. We tell the story of New Hampshire's Black folks from a Black perspective. So you're hearing a different voice. And I mean, just even understanding that what we're looking at is people's belongings and not objects changes everything. So we're looking at things in a different way. And we do it through major programs. We have the Tea Talks. We celebrate Juneteenth, where we celebrate Black culture, bringing people together. We have a statewide reading of Frederick Douglass's famous speech. And regionally, we have the Black New England Conference that also deals with current issues, but everything is really grounded in history, So we're not just picking these things out of air and making up stories. We have these long traditions that, have been erased or ignored or disappeared, built over, covered on, and we're just opening them up, uncovering them.
Thank you, JerriAnne. Senator Waters, the next question is for you. How this helps us change our understanding of New Hampshire history itself and our relationship to our past? And what transformation of understanding and learning have you seen?
Well, thanks so much, Selina. And I think that what JerriAnne was saying and what you were saying in your remarks too is that we have to ask why history matters. And New Hampshire's history has great value in terms of its depth, its complexity, and as you noted, Selina and JerriAnne, people use history to connect to place, to society, to the values of a place. But I think we have to recognize that history is constructed. It is preserved and forgot, and some things are forgotten. And so in a way, it's very liberating to think that since it was constructed or invented in certain ways, that frees us to reconstruct it, to reinvent it, and that people make the histories that have meaning to them. And so it can be remade, and that's why we can find ourselves, in all our stories. And, I took that phrase in the question, our history, and I think first and foremost, we have to make history plural. There are a lot of histories here. And then that word our, I think we just have to trouble that a little bit because, they talk about the royal we, right? But a lot of time the we is the white we, right? We think this, we know this, or our history. Well, who's the our there? And, the glory of America is that it was an invented country and that we can reinvent it too and make sure it's all of our histories. And I think that what shadows, even in the brief and powerful segment about the unearthing those graves, and I just tell you, I was there helping to carry those coffins and remains out of that muddy pit in the ground, and seeing a person's hip bone had been tossed by the backhoe into a pile of dirt, and it is really profound what happened there. And so we have to ask that question, how was New Hampshire's history preserved to give the image that it has, and for whose purposes, to whose advantage? And I think it asks us to understand, why there was this forgetting and erasure of Black history, because Black people have been in New Hampshire since the 1620s. There's a great book I'll recommend called Disowning Slavery, which is a very careful history about the process of erasing Black history in the late 18th and early 19th century, including in New Hampshire. And also, JerriAnne didn't mention, but she edited and wrote part of a great book, Harriet Wilson's New England. And I have an essay in there, very particular about Canterbury, Samson Battis, who was there, but also just a way of looking at how in our town histories that this history was known in the 19th century, but in the 1920s, the professional historians had erased it. So that's why recovery of the history is so important. And that's what the Black Heritage Trail is doing, what this film does. But let's think about recovery just in another way for a moment. For those of us in recovery, it's also about, finding health. Being in recovery is about renewal. It's about gaining strength. And I think that the recovery of the history means that we can recover as human beings as well. And, it's been said already by Valerie, African-American history is American history. And I think that to me, what is so powerful about that is that it makes us re-understand what freedom means in this country. To see how strongly Black people valued freedom, even when they were denied it in this country, and have to understand how African Americans' understanding of freedom showed the incompleteness and the weakness of the freedoms on which the country supposedly had been founded. And you look at that petition that's inscribed in the granite at the site. And it says, they said that they want the name of slave to be heard no more in New Hampshire. And they're right on about that it's linguistic, that race and slavery were a linguistic invention, and what was said can be unsaid. So lastly, the transformations is a tough question. I think we see the profound impact, Harriet Wilson, thank you, JerriAnne. My goodness, she's now, it's undeniable because of that statue and the Harriet Wilson Project and all that you've done, and the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail that Valerie started, and now the Black Heritage Trail of New England, the burying ground itself. And I remember at that reinterment ceremony, the Igbo priest, Oscar Mokeme, said that, the ancestors, the bones decided that it was time, that they could reemerge now because New Hampshire was ready to hear them speak. Now, I spent 44 years as a teacher, 39 at UNH, and I would say that yes, a lot of progress has been made. I think that progress at UNH though has been painfully slow. After 39 years, there weren't a whole lot more Black faculty members when I retired than there were in 1978, and quite a few of our most prominent Black faculty members have left in the last few years. And so it's a struggle. I think it's always going to be a struggle because there's going to be resistance in this state. And I just have to mention, because, you know, probably most of you have seen the news about the racist and anti-LGBTQ and anti-Semitic graffiti that was put on Temple Israel, two Black-owned businesses and 12 other sites in downtown Portsmouth, and it's a stark reminder for us. But, you know, being a historian, I just want to look back 100 years to Robert Frost, believe it or not. His poem, The Black Cottage, in his great book, North of Boston. And the Black Cottage is about a cottage that was associated with the Civil War in Derry. And it's been abandoned. It is blackened because of the mold on the front. And they go up and they touch it, and their hands, these white people, their hands turn black. And Frost was writing that poem at a time when there was ferocious Jim Crow coming to New Hampshire, and segregation and racism. And he was trying to contemplate, well, what then is the legacy of the Civil War and what it was fought for, and how's that being forgotten here? And I think touching that Black Cottage, it indicates that, look, if you enter the Black Cottage, if you touch the Black Cottage, that you have to lose your whiteness. And that's the message of that poem. And that is something that's very frightening. And there are a lot of consequences to it. And but that's the work that has to be done. And, you know, shadows fall north. The shadows are still here, but the hope is too. So thank you, Selina.
Thank you, Senator Waters, for those remarks. Excuse me. I think it's, you know, really important to really just hone in on what you were stating about at the earlier part of your statement about reconstructing history and recreating the meaning and whatnot. And I think that's really important when we start to educate young people, and, you know, and sharing these stories and exposing them to the history of the state of New Hampshire, but also the history of the United States. And so for Dariya, as a student, as a scholar, how has your experience interning in various New Hampshire organizations shaped your understanding of New Hampshire Black history?
Yeah, I think I can confidently say that I've learned more at my short time at both my internships about Black history than I did in middle school and high school when we talked about Black history. And as Senator Waters was speaking, I was just realizing I've never been taught by a Black teacher or professor in my entire time in the New Hampshire school district. I grew up in a predominantly white city and a predominantly white state, and obviously I go to UNH, so there's a lot that I was missing in my education, specifically in Black history, and a lot of it I had to do myself when I started hearing more about the Black Lives Matter protests back in 2020 during lockdown, and a lot was, I mean, on TikTok and Instagram, but I had to further research by myself a lot. And I found a lot of really interesting information, specifically on New Hampshire, during my time at the Seacoast African American Cultural Center, because for that internship, I did a lot of independent work. And I didn't even hear about the African burial ground until I was just randomly walking around Portsmouth with my family, which would have been something I would have loved to hear about in high school when it was presented, something that would mean a lot to me as a young Black woman growing up in this state. And this, like, learning about Harriet Wilson would have been just amazing. I think about just how little I learned in my time here, and it does make me very upset and sad. But now that I've found organizations such as the Black Heritage Trail and the Seacoast African American Cultural Center, I'm finally being able to surround myself with people who are not only educated in Black history, but understand what it means to them. And that has shown me like just how it means so much to me, and how little I knew before. Really, yeah, I'm just trying to educate myself and hopefully educate other people as I go along.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that, Dariya. And we hope that in time that we can continue to expose more people in not just in the state of New Hampshire, but all across the country and around the world of the rich history we have here. I guess I will also, I'll ask this final question to each panelist, if you would like to answer. Since you started this work in New Hampshire, or maybe somewhere else, but since you started this work and where you are now, what changes have you experienced or seen along the way in terms of study and recognizing New Hampshire Black history? And in no particular order, if you'd like to answer.
So I'll start. Since the African Burying Ground Memorial went up, and now we have the Harriet Wilson, and we've got these markers going up, there's much more dialogue around this history. You know, you can't run away from it. It just raises the question. If you go to the burying ground, it's like, what is this, right? Just that question, what is this? Brings the whole history right into now, the present, right? What are we doing? So I think that's the biggest change. It's given us an opportunity to talk about a history that to some people may be disruptive, to some people it may be painful, to some people we may want to get rid of it, but to some people it provides that understanding, that richness, that texture that was always missing from the story. You know, nobody's story is one-dimensional, right? America's story is not just this one thing, pull yourself up by the bootstrap and everybody's here. There are reasons, there are people who survived in spite of everything. They're success stories, they're hero stories, they're tragic stories. There's the whole human experience in these stories. And through that, like what David was saying, you know, we have to recognize our humanity, each of us, in these stories, in these places. If, you know, humans, we have to move beyond this hatred, or else we're just bound to repeat all of this. And it's true through understanding this history. And it's not a blame game or a place to feel that you're judged or stuff. It's just, this is the history. Now, how do we look at it? How do we deal with it? How do we repair? How do we renew? And how do we move forward as human beings?
I don't know if Dariya or Senator Waters, if you had anything to add.
Dariya, why don't you, I've said, JerriAnne, just her words are so powerful, but Dariya, what do you think?
I mean, like I said, I've been part of these organizations for just a short time, but I've noticed maybe more conversations being started, and now being able to participate in conversations because I'm slightly more educated. I know there's a long way to go, is great. But just overall, I mean, I've taken more classes more recently, and we talk about race, specifically in anthropology. It's very unethical field. So I'm in a class with Dr. Amy Michaels, and we talk about race and just how it was invented, and just racism and anthropology as a whole. And every reading, I'm just like gasping because I'm learning something new. So being able to learn that at this school I'm very privileged to be able to say that I've been able to do that. And although it is a predominantly white institution, getting that education is very valuable to me. And I'm able to share that information that I'm receiving with other like members of my family who also grew up in New Hampshire in this white area, and also don't know a lot about Black history.
Dariya, you've touched on a few things that I think is just really profound, especially when it comes to doing this work. It's just knowing and hearing about it, right? Just a simple walking down the street and seeing something that was not once there, and having the curiosity, and then going a step further to just learn more and wanting to learn more and finding the resources. And it's important that, you know, we have resources like the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, the Seacoast Cultural Center. You know, there's resources at the University of New Hampshire that people can access to learn more about the history, American history, and especially when it comes to Indigenous and Black people here. So I think, you know, it doesn't require necessarily someone to do all of this research or be a scholar, but just to have the curiosity and just to be able to see something and know that, there, you know, this is different, this is new, and being able to just follow that trail, right? And look what your curiosity has led you to. And so I commend you for just paying attention and noticing and wanting to learn more. And that's what we just need. And to JerriAnne's point, there, you know, people, it's not about blaming anybody. It's not about, you know, pointing the finger. It's a responsibility to just tell the story, right? Just as simple as that, telling the story, the whole story. So, you know, thank you, all of you, for just.
Can I just say one thing?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Sorry, I just have to share this because this is, I think this is why I do this work and why we do this work. My grandson came home the other day and they're doing slavery in his classroom now. And he said, my teacher said something about the slaves who were from Africa. And he said, Grammy, I put my hand up and said, they weren't slaves. They were enslaved. And I said, all right, he heard something. And that totally changes the mindset. And I just had to share because it's, you do these things, you don't know whose ears they fall on. You're in it, you're telling it, and it makes a difference.
Absolutely, and that's beautiful. Good job, Kamani. All right, thank you again, Senator Waters, JerriAnne, Dariya, for your time, for your knowledge, for your work. At this moment, we have some questions from our audience, and I'm going to do my best to field those questions and pose it to our panelists, and whoever feels inspired to answer, go right ahead. Let's see. And continue to post your questions in the Q&A chat in the box. So our first question is, I think JerriAnne touched on this earlier, but what efforts are underway to expand the amount of monuments or statues to honor New Hampshire Black history? Do you know of any? JerriAnne, would you like to take that?
So this is some really exciting things going on in our state, not only with the Black Heritage Trail, putting markers up across the state, or you know, the monuments that we have up, but there is plans to put a statue in New Market, and then maybe there's talks about putting a portrait of Cheswell in the town, in the state capital. You know, there's just all these sites of memories that are coming up. I'm blanking on one other person that wanted to put a statue up that they're looking at, but it's a ripple effect. There are towns that put up, they are honoring their Revolutionary War vet with grave site markers, And we're just seeing this come up where people are asking and doing, because that history is important.
If I might chime in, JerriAnne, because the project that you and I are working on with the Black Heritage Trail is that we're trying to preserve the house site and grave site of Ona Marie Judge Staines. And she was enslaved by George and Martha Washington. She escaped from the president's house in Philadelphia to Portsmouth, and Washington tried every trick in the book, including kidnapping, to try to get her back into slavery. And so she fled to Greenland and spent the next 50 years there hiding out, basically, because until she died, she was still supposedly enslaved. And it's just an extraordinary important site, and we're working to see if it can't be preserved and restored. And if you're interested in that story, which is one of the great national stories here in New Hampshire, there's a wonderful book called Never Caught, which would give you that history of the Washington family, Ona Judge's family, enslaved by Washington, and so much more in history in New Hampshire too. So just thought that's some, there's a lot coming up, huh, JerriAnne? We're gonna do it.
So, with the next question, with the recent pressures across the country to limit what is taught in history class, what will be lost to our children and really all citizens?
Dariya, please take that.
And also, I will tie into, there's a question that, have we made progress in teaching Black history in New Hampshire schools? So,
although I have graduated, I graduated high school in 2019, and it is different here at UNH, but I think we will lose a lot. And we already didn't have a lot to begin with. Really, what I got in high school, maybe middle school, was just a blanket statement of Martin Luther King. There's little segregation, but it's all gone now, so it's okay. And obviously that hasn't been my experience. That hasn't been anyone's experience. And we're gonna lose a lot, and especially young Black students who are surrounded by white students, having this idea that they need to fit in and be like their peers. That's gonna really take away their curiosity to learn more about their history and about American history. And I know that was my experience too, until I got out and educated myself a little bit further. But it is a little scary to see the way we're going, considering like where we started.
I'll just throw in, as an elected official, that I think we are in danger of losing our democracy. And this is, I think, as important an issue about America, that if we can't have free education and we can't look very hard into our past and our mirrors and find hope for our future, we're going to be in profound trouble. And I think it's especially true in this state. I remember when Elizabeth Virgil's portrait, she was the first Black graduate in 1926 in UNH, and when that was unveiled, and she was there in a wheelchair, didn't live much longer, but there she was, that she was acknowledged, and that's what we're in danger of erasing right now. And this is, I will say there's a bill in the state legislature that was heard last week to ban this history and ban books. So it's here.
All right. So next question. You know what, I just want to skip around a little bit, just because we're on this topic, and there have been a couple of comments and questions regarding this divisive language law and learning Black history in the schools. Someone asked, Dariya, you mentioned that it is a privilege to learn about Black history in the state. In some ways, it breaks my heart. I'm curious about what other classmates are saying students upset about the lack of access to these histories as well?
Sorry, I'm just rereading the question. I think there's this I think when it comes to students in Black history, I think they don't even realize what they're missing because they're just not really taught about it in the first place. They don't realize that there's more to it than just slavery and segregation, especially depending on what state they're in. They don't realize that there's more room to grow, more room to educate. And like Senator Waters said, we're going to lose that. I said it was a privilege. It should be a right, but it's just wonderful to be able to learn about Black history. And I'm very privileged to be able to experience that in a broader sense than just what I got in my public school education. It's really wonderful.
I would just add a little bit about on that. You know, if you want to dominate a culture, a person, you take away their history, right? If you want to subjugate them, you take away their history. They don't know where they belong, who they are. The more you erase that history, the more compliant you have a group of people, because they don't know their history. They don't have that to go on. So when we lose this history, and we can say this, you know, we can see this deliberateness of erasing this history, you know, in keeping a class of people underrepresented and therefore oppressed.
Thank you, JerriAnne.
Selina, can I ask, actually, I wondered if Susan would like to just say a couple words too.
Absolutely.
She certainly knows UNH and this question too. So Susan, do you mind?
Is Susan still on? I didn't see her. I don't know if she's still.
Well, maybe not. How about you, Selina?
Yeah. Sorry, you think after 3 years now doing Zoom meetings that I would get the hand of the mute and unmute. Yeah, I think, you know, I grew up through the New York City public school system, and New York has one of the most segregated schools system in the country. And so a lot of people think because of how culturally diverse it is in New York, that there's all this exposure in the school system. And no, there was a lot that that was absent from our history book. But not only that, just even having access to quality resources in education for Black and Brown students, that was a huge issue. I graduated from what formerly John Jay High School. I was the last graduating class because the people in the community where the school was in was predominantly white. And the majority of the students who went to the school were Black and Brown from other communities and neighborhoods. And so there was an effort to get us out. And I mean, just, you know, so it's in addition to just erasing our history, and to what JerriAnne was stating earlier, you know, we're bound to repeat it. I've lived it in New York City, seeing how, you know, Black and Brown people are being actually erased from just the school and education. And so it's very impactful. And I think it's really important that we continue to do this work. And everyone should look at their own state and their own communities and see what's missing, what's not there, right? And really try to advocate for more books, more resources, more teachers, educators, so that our young people can be exposed, so that, you know, we can build a more diverse and inclusive community and environment where all voices are heard and all stories are being told. And I think that's really important. So. there were a few questions in the chat about where can we access the full documentary, and what, if you could talk a little bit about the trail, and especially the trail in Portsmouth, and what is offered there, and what the experience is like. So JerriAnne, do you want to take that on behalf of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire?
So the full documentary, you can, if you're at UNH, you can access it through the Center for the Humanities. Just call Katie. And if you want to own a copy of the DVD, you can just email us at info@blackheritagetrailnh.org. Your other question was what you can see on the trail?
Yeah, the trail in Portsmouth. And could you talk a little bit about the other trails as well?
Okay. So in Portsmouth, we have about 23 markers in Portsmouth to tell different stories of New Hampshire's Black history. It's we have a bunch of tours that are by themed, you know, early 1800 Black women in Portsmouth, the civil rights movement, boys and girls for sale. You know, there's just a plethora of them that you can just look at our website on the tours. And the tours are usually about an hour, hour and a half. They're told, the stories are told by interpreters who have, again, tell the stories from the Black perspective. So you're getting a deeper look into the story. We're not only in Portsmouth, we have these tours in Milford, bus tours to Warner, Hancock, Exeter, Greenland, and Kittery. In Kittery, we tell the story, a Green Book story of during de facto segregation. The Sinclairs had a home that was a safe vacation house for African Americans travelers. So those are some of the stories. We do the history, but we also bring that history to today. So the issue is, you know, what does this history tell us about today? Our tour started at our office at 222 Court Street, and they end at the African Burying Ground in Portsmouth for the tours, where we tell that story of the burying site. And, you know, most people are always shocked at the burial site because it's unlike any burial site that we have in New England. And, you know, it's not the only, there's a burial site in Warner. Somebody asked how far we go. There's Black history up at Colebrook, all over from the seacoast to Keene, and then all the way up into the White Mountains. So we had pockets of Black history across the state, bigger communities in what would have been Exeter and Portsmouth, the hubs of the state.
Thank you, JerriAnne. And, you know, I just, as we close, because we're at our time, and I just want to thank you all for being with us today and engaging in a really important conversation about our American history, about telling our stories in New Hampshire. And I just hope that you all were encouraged to really look further, and not just in New Hampshire, but also in your own state, in your own town, to learn more about Indigenous and African history and the stories that are consistently being erased. One of the things that I want to kind of leave everyone with is something from the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And there's this question that's posed on the site. What happens when we move forward? What happens when we move forward into a fuller understanding of our history by including all voices? And I guess that's the question that I would leave with all of you. And I hope that you were really, really encouraged. Again, thank you again, Senator Waters, JerriAnne, Dariya. We will, I think they will send an email out with all the resources as a follow-up. So you can learn more about the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And also check out the chat box. There are some links to some of the resources Senator Waters referred to earlier. So check out those books. And thank you again for being with us this evening. Have a good night.
And Dariya is going to be giving tours this season. So
yeah, so come back for UNH alumni reunion and visit us at 222 Court Street. Did I get that address right?
Yes.
JerriAnne? Okay.
Yes.
For your own tour of the Black Heritage Trail. Good night.